In the middle of North America, far from the marble avenues of Rome and long before the first European ships touched these shores, a city rose that should not have been possible. Not a village. Not a seasonal gathering place. A city. At its height, around AD 1050 to 1200, Cahokia became the largest urban center north of Mexico. An immense settlement of earthworks, plazas, monuments, and controlled movement, organized at a scale that still unsettles the modern mind. No iron tools. No horses. No written chronicles to announce its kings or record its decrees. And yet, somehow, thousands upon thousands of people were brought into alignment under a political order powerful enough to reshape the landscape itself. That is the first mystery of Cahokia. Not that it existed. That it existed at all. Because history has trained the eye to look for empire in familiar disguises, stone roads, cavalry, coinage, imperial script, legible bureaucracy. Cahokia offers none of the convenient markers. And still, the evidence is unmistakable. Monk's Mound rises like a deliberate act of will. The Grand Plaza stretches as if designed for public power rather than simple habitation. The palisade, the ordered mounds, the astronomical alignments, these were not accidental accumulations of earth. They were decisions. They were statecraft made visible. The largest urban center north of Mexico. That phrase carries a quiet shock, because it forces a confrontation with prejudice. Complex civilization did not simply arrive from Europe. It did not wait politely for conquest, ink, or imported institutions. In the Mississippi world, long before colonization, a society emerged that understood how to concentrate labor, authority, and belief into one immense civic machine. Cahokia was not a primitive outlier. It was a political achievement of the highest order. And like all great political achievements, it rested on a dangerous illusion, that human beings can be persuaded, organized, and bound together strongly enough to make the impossible feel natural. That is where Cahokia becomes more than archaeology. It becomes a test case in power itself. How does a society manufacture legitimacy when it lacks the familiar tools of empire? How does it persuade farmers, craftsmen, ritual specialists, and migrants to surrender labor to a central vision? How does belief become obedience, and obedience become architecture, and architecture become authority? Cahokia answers those questions with a brutal elegance. The city did not merely collect people. It converted human trust into command. This is why Professor Adrian Lockewell does not approach Cahokia as a mute ruin scattered across an American field. He approaches it as a chessboard. On that board stand rulers without names, priests without chronicles, laborers without monuments of their own, and a landscape transformed into a theater of ambition. Every mound, every plaza, every boundary line whispers the same truth: power is never just held. It is performed, dramatized, and believed into being. The astonishing part is not that Cahokia rose. It is that a society without iron, without horses, without written records, and without the machinery that later states would call civilization still managed to do what many empires struggle to do even now: coordinate the many, elevate the few, and make submission feel meaningful. That is the paradox at the center of this story. A city in the heartland. A metropolis of earth instead of stone. A hierarchy built not on visible imperial trappings, but on sacred power, collective labor, and a political imagination vast enough to turn a floodplain into a capital. And once that paradox is understood, the next question becomes inevitable: what kind of world could produce it? To answer that, the investigation must move outward, from the impossible city itself to the wider Mississippi world that fed it, linked it, and made its rise strategically possible. Once Cahokia is established as a fact, the harder question begins: what kind of world could feed it, connect it, and keep it obedient? The answer lies not in a single river, but in a continental chessboard of water, soil, movement, and power. The Mississippi was never merely a river. It was a corridor of logistics, a flowing boundary line, and a system of exchange that tied together the Great Lakes, the Gulf Coast, the Appalachian interior, and the Western Plains. In a world without roads capable of carrying heavy cargo at scale, without horses to multiply speed, and without written ledgers to stabilize administration, the rivers did something far more important. They made distance governable. Rivers functioned as roads and power arteries. That is the first strategic fact of Cahokia. It did not rise in isolation. It rose at the center of movement. To the north, copper and other prized materials could travel from the Great Lakes region. To the south, marine shell and Gulf Coast goods entered the exchange web. From the east came mica and chert in different forms and qualities, from the west, the resources and pressures of the plains. The city stood where these worlds could meet, and that meant geography itself became a political advantage. But geography alone does not build a city. It only creates the possibility of concentration. What made Cahokia powerful was the ability to convert ecological abundance into surplus, and surplus into hierarchy. Maize agriculture changed the arithmetic of life. Once fields could support more people than hunting and gathering alone, population density rose. That density allowed specialization. Some people could become builders, potters, bead makers, ritual specialists, organizers, and administrators instead of spending every waking hour searching for food. In other words, maize did not just fill stomachs, it created time. And in every early civilization, time is the hidden currency of power. A surplus economy does something else as well, it makes leaders possible. Not because people suddenly become wiser, but because coordination becomes necessary. Someone must direct labor, manage storage, regulate exchange, settle disputes, and decide which projects deserve the collective effort of hundreds or thousands of households. In Cahokia, that authority can be read in the architecture. Monk's Mound did not rise by accident. Its scale speaks of labor organized over time, earth moved in enormous quantities, and a social order capable of commanding compliance. The Grand Plaza, too, was not empty space. It was planned space, a political stage on which community could be assembled and spectacle could be controlled. The city was a system, not a skyline. And systems reveal power in the way they shape movement. Woodhenge, with its alignments to solar events, suggests that time itself had been claimed by authority. Seasonal timing mattered in an agricultural society, but it also mattered in a sacred one. If elites could frame the calendar, they could frame legitimacy. They could present themselves not merely as managers of grain and labor, but as interpreters of cosmic order. That is a profoundly old strategy, and it appears again and again in human history. When institutions are young and fragile, ritual becomes governance. Still, Cahokia was not simply a local chiefdom inflated by self-importance. It belonged to a broader Mississippian world, a cultural sphere made of related practices, shared symbols, exchange ties, and moving populations. The city's strength came from being both distinctive and connected. It drew people in, and people did not arrive as abstract migration numbers. They came with skills, memories, lineages, obligations, rivalries, and expectations. Migration can strengthen an emerging center by feeding it labor and talent. It can also destabilize it by introducing competition, friction, and political unpredictability. Cahokia likely experienced both. A growing city becomes a magnet for ambition, and ambition is never obedient for long. This is one of the great misunderstandings about early urbanism. Modern observers often imagine a city as a fixed place enclosed by walls, but Cahokia was more like a living node in a network. Its influence depended on motion, of goods, of people, of stories, of ritual prestige. The palisade that later surrounded parts of the core was not only a defensive structure. It also marked space, separation, and control. It announced that the center of power had boundaries, and that those boundaries mattered. The city was trying to distinguish insiders from outsiders, order from disorder, sanction authority from the turbulence beyond its perimeter. The trade goods themselves tell the story with brutal clarity. Marine shell from the Gulf did not arrive because someone merely liked pretty objects. Copper from the Great Lakes was not prized just because it glinted in the sun. These were prestige materials, and prestige materials are never neutral. They are instruments of rank. They travel through social channels that are already unequal, and once they reach the center, they are transformed into tokens of status, sacred meaning, and political loyalty. A shell gorget, a copper object, a carefully worked blade of chert, each could function as evidence that the elite were connected to places ordinary people were not, and to powers ordinary people could only admire from below. That is where economics becomes symbolism. When elites control exchange, they do not merely become wealthier. They become necessary. They can reward allies, display cosmological authority, and bind followers into a hierarchy of access. They can turn scarcity into dependence. They can decide who receives the rare object, who participates in the ceremony, who stands near the center, and who remains at the margins. This is the deeper political genius of early states. Material control is rarely enough on its own. The ruler must also control meaning. The people must believe that the flow of goods reflects the proper flow of power. In Cahokia, belief and logistics worked together. The city could not command the landscape by force alone, because there was no modern bureaucracy and no permanent machine of coercion in the later imperial sense. Instead, power was negotiated through ritual, exchange, gathering, and the visible concentration of labor. Sacred authority gave the city its coherence. Trade gave it reach. Agricultural surplus gave it endurance. Together, these forces produced something extraordinary, a society capable of scaling up without the familiar tools of later empire. No iron roads. No cavalry. No alphabetic archive. And yet, somehow, a vast urban world emerged anyway. That achievement should not be mistaken for stability. The same networks that made Cahokia powerful also made it vulnerable. A city dependent on surplus must protect the fields that generate that surplus. A center dependent on exchange must preserve the routes that feed prestige and obligation. A leadership class that draws authority from ritual must continuously prove that it deserves the role. Every layer of success adds another layer of dependence. The more the city grows, the more it must coordinate. The more it must coordinate, the more fragile its consensus becomes. So Cahokia was never just a settlement beside a river. It was a calculated answer to a continental problem: how to gather people, extract surplus, sanctify authority, and keep the system moving. Its greatness came from the same source as its eventual weakness: concentration. Concentrated population. Concentrated labor. Concentrated belief. Concentrated power. And once power gathers in one place, the next question becomes unavoidable: who controls the machine, who benefits from it, and what happens when the machine begins to demand more than the society can safely give? That is where the story turns from landscape to leadership, and from network to strategy. At the center of Cahokia's power was a simple, brutal truth: stone was not the only thing that could be built into authority. Earth, timber, labor, and belief could be assembled into something even more durable than walls. The great mounds were not passive monuments. They were political statements written in dirt and muscle. Every basket of soil hauled upward, every terrace shaped, every platform raised above the floodplain proclaimed the same message: someone here can command thousands of people to move together for a purpose larger than themselves. Monumental architecture was not decoration. It was proof of command. And that proof mattered because power in Cahokia did not rest on iron weapons, cavalry, or written decrees. It rested on coordination. On the ability to turn scattered households, rival lineages, and migrating communities into a single civic order. A mound was therefore never just a mound. It was a visible ledger of obedience, sacrifice, hierarchy, and time. The city's leaders were not merely building upward, they were building belief into the landscape. This is where Cahokia becomes more than a city. It becomes an experiment in early statecraft. In societies like this, ritual and administration are not separate realms. They are twins. The same elite who organized labor also controlled ceremonies. The same people who decided when a mound rose might also decide when a festival began, when seeds were planted, and when the community should gather beneath the heavens and accept the order being imposed upon it. That is why astronomy mattered so much. At Cahokia, structures such as Woodhenge reveal a society that was not only watching the sky, but using the sky as a clock for power. The alignments tied ceremonial life to seasonal cycles, especially the turning points of the year. This was not idle sky-gazing. It synchronized the population. It gave rhythm to agriculture, feast days, and public assembly. And in any early state, the ability to synchronize people is the beginning of governance. Because a leader who can say when the community must gather also gains the authority to define why it has gathered. That is the hidden genius of sacred time. The calendar becomes a political weapon. The sun becomes a public argument. The heavens themselves are recruited into the service of human hierarchy. Yet Cahokia's rulers did not rule by ceremony alone. They also ruled by selective force, and the archaeological record shows that sacred authority and coercion were often entangled. The most famous and most debated example is Mound 72, where excavations uncovered an elite burial accompanied by a complex arrangement of human remains and grave goods. Scholars have interpreted the evidence with caution, but the broader picture is hard to ignore. This was a world in which status was staged in death as well as life, and where ritual could demand bodies, not just offerings. That must be handled carefully. The evidence does not permit theatrical certainty, and it would be a mistake to reduce Cahokia to a lurid story of cruelty. But neither should the violence be sanitized away. The politics of the ancient world often used ritual as a bridge between awe and fear. A society may call it sacrifice, ceremony, or sacred obligation. In strategic terms, it is a way of demonstrating that authority can reach beyond ordinary life and claim even the bodies of the vulnerable. This is the hard logic of early states. Belief is not merely persuaded, it is organized. And when institutions are still young, ritual can become governance almost before anyone notices the boundary has disappeared. Cahokia's leadership likely understood this with ruthless clarity. To govern such a large and diverse population, they had to do more than distribute food or direct construction. They had to control meaning. Who speaks for the cosmos? Who reads the seasons? Who decides what the mounds signify? Who can present a burial as sacred, a festival as necessary, a labor draft as honorable? These are not ceremonial details. These are the core questions of political legitimacy. And in that contest, elite display mattered enormously. Feasts, regalia, architecture, and ritual performance all served to separate rulers from the ruled without needing constant open violence. Power in Cahokia was therefore theatrical, but not in the trivial sense. It was theater with consequences. It told people where they stood in the universe. It created memory. It made hierarchy feel ancient even when it was being invented. The mound building itself reinforces this interpretation. A structure like Monk's Mound did not arise through spontaneous devotion. It required planning, labor discipline, resource extraction, and social compliance over time. Somebody had to command the food that fed the workers, the schedules that moved them, the tools that organized the earth moving, and the authority that prevented the whole project from collapsing into resentment. Every layer of earth was also a layer of administration. Every rise in height represented a rise in institutional capacity. That is what makes Cahokia so extraordinary. It shows that in the pre-modern world, states could emerge not only through conquest, but through conviction. Not just by seizing fields, but by seizing the imagination. The city did not merely house power. It manufactured it. And yet manufactured power always carries a hidden danger. It depends on the continuing belief that the performance is legitimate. Once the people stop seeing the ritual as cosmic necessity and begin seeing it as elite manipulation, the machine starts to weaken from within. This is why sacred power is so effective in its prime and so fragile in decline. It can move mountains, it can also vanish when belief fractures. Cahokia's rulers were competing in a larger battle than any individual feud. They were fighting for interpretive control over the world itself. The harvest, the sky, the dead, the public ceremonies, the layout of the city, the timing of work, the meaning of sacrifice, these were all pieces on the same board. Whoever controlled them controlled reality as the people experienced it. And that is the deepest strategic insight Cahokia offers. In the early centuries of complex society, power was not simply the ability to punish. It was the ability to define order. It was the ability to persuade tens of thousands of people that hierarchy was not only useful, but sacred, not only inevitable, but written into the cosmos. The archaeologist sees earthworks. The historian sees institutions. The strategist sees a regime trying to make its authority feel like nature itself. That was Cahokia at its height, a city of vast labor, deliberate ceremony, and disciplined symbolism. A place where the mound, the plaza, the calendar, and the grave all belonged to the same political architecture. And once that architecture was in place, the city had climbed to a dangerous height. For any system that depends on belief, coordination, and elite consensus can appear invincible, right up until the moment the spell weakens. From here, the question changes. Not how Cahokia rose, but how a city built on sacred command began to strain under the weight of its own success. And that is where the cracks begin to matter. By the late 12th century, Cahokia's great machine had begun to grind against its own limits. What had once looked like mastery was now revealing its hidden price. The city had risen on surplus, coordination, and belief, but none of those forces were permanent. They had to be renewed season after season, harvest after harvest, generation after generation. Forests were cut back for fuel, construction, and expansion, and each tree removed from the landscape made the center more expensive to sustain. Floodplains demanded constant management. Fields had to produce enough not only for farmers, but for laborers, priests, rulers, and the thousands drawn into the city's gravitational pull. In that kind of system, agriculture was never just agriculture. It was political survival. It was public confidence made visible. And it was always vulnerable to climate, timing, and social cooperation. This is where collapse is often misunderstood. Histories of fallen cities are too often written as if they ended with one dramatic blow, one final raid, one decisive catastrophe. But Cahokia does not fit that cheap logic. No single disaster needs to be invented to explain the silence that followed. Great societies more often unravel by accumulation than by impact. Floods shift. Harvests fail. Wood becomes scarcer. Rival lineages compete for prestige. Trade routes become less reliable. People move away. And the longer the burdens rise while the promises of sacred authority weaken, the more ordinary life begins to question the whole structure. That is the deeper tragedy of Cahokia. Its power depended on centralized belief and coordinated labor, yet that same concentration made it fragile. The more a city relies on a shared vision of order, the more dangerous it becomes when that vision fractures. Success became its own enemy. The great mounds did not stop maturing overnight. The plazas did not empty in a single season. The palisade did not suddenly lose meaning in a day. Instead, the system thinned. Authority became harder to enforce. Labor became harder to command. The elite could still perform power, but performance is not the same as command. And when migration began pulling people outward, the city's gravitational force weakened from the inside. In a political world built on ritual legitimacy, a crack in the sacred consensus could spread faster than any wall could contain it. Once that happened, even the most impressive monuments could become the mute shells of a confidence that no longer held. By around AD 1200, the decline had accelerated. By roughly AD 1350, Cahokia was largely abandoned as a dense urban center, though scholars still debate the exact sequence of events and the precise balance of causes. That uncertainty is not a weakness in the historical record. It is a reminder of what serious history actually is, a forensic reconstruction of systems under stress, not a courtroom drama in search of one guilty party. Environmental pressure, internal rivalry, demographic movement, and institutional exhaustion could all have worked together. Cahokia did not need to be conquered to be undone. And that is precisely what makes its disappearance so unsettling. It exposes a fact that empires, governments, corporations, and every ambitious institution would prefer to deny: scale is not permanence. A large system can look invincible at the very moment it is becoming harder to sustain. The bigger the structure, the more it depends on invisible cooperation. The more elaborate the hierarchy, the more catastrophic the loss of trust. The stronger the center appears, the more vulnerable it becomes to the slow erosion of consensus beneath it. There is a cruel symmetry here. The same energy that built Cahokia the ability to mobilize people, align belief, and concentrate surplus also created the conditions for unraveling when those alignments no longer held. The city did not fail because it lacked ambition. It failed because ambition had succeeded too completely, until the system became too complex, too centralized, and too dependent on uninterrupted agreement. After the decline, the land itself did not preserve the memory kindly. Fields were plowed. Earthworks were damaged. The old landscape was remade for other purposes, and for a long time the achievements of an indigenous metropolis were minimized or dismissed by outsiders who lacked either the imagination or the honesty to recognize what had stood there. For generations, the site was treated less like evidence of a great civilization and more like a curiosity, a ruin stripped of proper context in the popular mind. That, too, is part of Cahokia's afterlife, not only abandonment, but forgetting. Yet forgetting is never total. The ground keeps its testimony. Archaeology forced the truth back into view. The scale of the mounds. The geometry of the plazas. The labor invested in the palisade, the ceremonial spaces, the planned urban core. The long-distance exchange networks. The population density. The unmistakable evidence that a major city had once risen in the Mississippi heartland, a city not borrowed from Europe, not copied from the Mediterranean, but built from the strategic intelligence of North America itself. That revelation matters because it rearranges the map of human possibility. Cahokia is not a footnote to civilization. It is a reminder that large-scale social order can emerge in many places, under many conditions, through belief systems and political methods very different from the ones later empires would label as advanced. It proves that history is crowded with societies that were real, sophisticated, and powerful and then were nearly erased by time, conquest, prejudice, or neglect. The verdict, then, is severe but clear. Cahokia was not destroyed by weakness alone, nor by strength alone. It fell because success had made it complex, and complexity had made it vulnerable. The city's achievements contained the seed of its fragility, a center too dependent on coordination, too exposed to environmental pressure, and too reliant on the uninterrupted authority of its sacred order. When that order began to fail, the city's greatness did not save it. It magnified the consequences. And that is the modern mirror. Every large institution repeats the same temptation, to confuse momentum with durability, and scale with security. The bigger the system becomes, the easier it is for those inside it to believe it has transcended ordinary limits. But history is merciless about such illusions. Cities run on food, trust, and logistics. States run on legitimacy. Empires run on the belief that yesterday's arrangement will still hold tomorrow. When those invisible foundations crack, monuments do not answer back. Cahokia therefore asks a question that no archive can fully settle: How many of the structures that seem permanent in the present are simply surviving on inherited belief, waiting for the moment when coordination becomes too costly, too contested, or too fragile to maintain? That is the lasting power of the city that vanished. Not merely that it was built, or that it fell, but that it reveals the ancient arithmetic of power itself, that every great center is only as strong as the trust, labor, and imagination that keep it alive. And in the silence that followed Cahokia, history left behind its harshest lesson: human beings can build wonders, but they often mistake the wonder for a guarantee.